defending our business empire, coming from the legal, we have talked this whole year about all kinds of different things, from valuation to, cash flow, revenue, growth. But one of the things that I wanted to bring to the table, and why I asked Noelle to join me, was because sometimes we have experiences that lead to things that we wish we would have done a little bit earlier, and pitfalls. And I want to tell you a story. How many of you, if you can, I don't have my chat pulled up, but I'm going to pull it up. I want you guys to talk to us today. How many of you ever driven on either ice or snow? You've driven on ice or snow. Just give me a thumbs up. Yes, I've done it. Because I want to see what you guys are saying in here. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And floods. That's some definite different types of driving. So I bring up this picture because one, we all have done it. And right, usually you think in your head, I just want to be safe. I want to get to my destination safely. My mom, when I was a little girl, she's like, we got to get you to school. They still had school. It was snowing and the road looked okay, right? It looked fine. So we took off on the way, half a mile down the road. There's a T. And all I remember my mom saying was, oh, it's not stopping. And the next thing I knew, I blacked out and we were in the ditch. My mom, my sister in the middle, she's like 3 or 4, and me on the side in the ditch. I don't remember how we got out, but what comes up from this story is sometimes we think, well, we should have done this. I should have done that. Why didn't we do this? And I want to bring that back into what we're talking about today, right? And hopefully that somehow touches you, what you've experienced, what you've gone through. But sometimes we always say, I wish I would have, and we want to help you avoid the pitfalls by sharing it today so you can take action, have a plan in place, go through. We're going to be talking about these 3 areas: asset protection, wealth transfer, legal housekeeping. How can we keep our stuff clean and up to date and make sure we don't have any pitfalls like my mom and I and my sister going into the ditch, which was totally unexpected. Thank goodness we were safe, and you might have had incidences in your space too. So let's dive into the first one, asset protection. I mean, doesn't that look beautiful right now? Sunshiny beach and that umbrella. Now, when we think about our asset protection, right, we sometimes think of an umbrella, but in this picture, if there's one person there, they're going to be protected. If there's 2, maybe 2. But what if you brought your family of 10 and the 3 dogs and they're sitting out on that beach? Everybody's going to leave maybe a little bit sunburnt, right? So I want you to ponder with us, what events in your world remain uncovered? What events in your world remain uncovered from an asset protection space? What is left uncovered? And you can go ahead and chime into the chat at any point. We want to hear from you. I want you guys thinking about it and exploring. So I'm going to have Noelle dive in. We're going to be talking about a couple things: working with partners, business structures, business assets, and IP in this section. So Noelle, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Amanda, and thank you for inviting me to speak today and that very kind introduction from the both of you. I really appreciate it. First and foremost, it's encouraging to be here, and it should be fun, and you should have a lot of takeaways. But it's also some serious topics and things that may not have crossed your mind before. So it's okay if it's the first time you're hearing them, or maybe it's the 10th time you're hearing it from a different perspective. So just be encouraged, and I'm happy to answer any questions along the way as well as afterwards. So thinking about asset protection, one of the things I want you to take away is that mitigating risk is the strategic management piece that accomplishes asset protection. So you're here today because you're doing amazing in your professions, and you're here to find out how you can do better, how you can have that advantage, how you can strategically plan for greater success forward. And the focus is on risk management, reducing that exposure to liability. And liability can come in many different ways. And it can be that one of the most significant setbacks to your growth. So just like that pitfall, or literally in Amanda's pretty tragic story, you don't want to end up in the ditch. We want to have the strategic upper hand before the liability arises. And if it inevitably arises, we can try and avoid it and mitigate it. So let's take a closer look at some of these uncovered events. So we have working with partners. Nothing wrong with working with partners. We love it. We want to be available and open to all kinds of contracts and agreements and ideas and ventures, but we have to do it strategically. And we have to remember that anything as simple as a handshake and some action with another partner is a general partnership. You don't even have to be incorporated. It can just be a plan of action, maybe some investment, and you're already in a partnership and you don't even know it. Just because you're not incorporated doesn't mean there isn't some kind of contractual obligation there. So when you are in business with someone else, you have to remember that now the liability has doubled. So let me give you an example of this. You don't want to pass up on and maybe an investment property. You and your business partner decide, okay, let's go ahead and just buy this up. I'll put 100K down and you put 100K down. Great, you're in equal business now on this investment. But your risk has now doubled because your exposure is not just yours, but also your partner's. In other words, your partner's potential spouse, your partner's kids, their minor kids, your partner's dog, they're your problem now. Because if anything happens to your partner's liability, that's going to attach to this mutual investment that you now have together. And so it's not that they can necessarily take away your investment from you, but your investment's now further exposed and it's further at risk. And you don't want to end up doing business with your partner's creditor because you didn't shake hands with them initially. So the biggest takeaway here is it's a common pitfall to own real estate with another partner if you don't have a business structure to sever that liability from you personally. And it's important to remember that any agreement is technically a partnership. And so without a formal business structure, you're not going to have the protections you need. My guess is you're all in some way incorporated. So I think we can avoid this big ditch. So let's go on to the next potential pitfall, which is what kind of business structure should you have or do you have? Is it protecting you? Is it not? And I would say that this is the biggest area of it depends because it depends on your specific nature of your business, what kind of assets you have, whether you have a license to practice what you do, and what kind of tax structure you need. And a lot of how you form an entity or why might have to do with how much income you want to pass through to your entity or from your entity, maximum contributions you want to make. And so that might dictate what entity you form, whether it's a corporation or an LLC. If it is, how is it taxed, etc. One of the takeaways for asset protection is if you are in a liability, in other words, if your business entity gets sued or you get sued personally, how can we put you in a better advantage? And the way to think through that is if you have a corporation, your stock might be up for grabs. If somebody goes after your stock, they could force liquidate your business. But if your business is just you, let's say you don't have a lot of assets, it's just you running maybe personal services or professional services, they may not be able to do anything too significant because you're operating within a business structure that doesn't necessarily have a lot of assets. It's you who's making the business profitable. So you can probably avoid that litigation or that big liability. But if you, let's say, have an entity and own real property or you own big machinery or something like that, now we have assets that are potentially up for grabs. This creditor can come in and liquidate your assets and force the assets to come to them. We can, through the use of LLCs as well, make more protection around your strategic negotiating point against a creditor. And so we have some tactics that can bolster the structure. We can change or advise to change to LLCs in some instances. In some instances, if you have an LLC, which is a limited liability company, we may advise you to venue it in a different state with more favorable laws. We may advise you to use a domestic asset protection trust, which has better laws, but there's no one size fits all, because the reality is it's dependent on the nature of your business, what's exposed and what's not. The biggest takeaway is we definitely want a business structure, because that's going to sever your personal liability, meaning walking, driving, hosting, whatever it is that you're doing, from the nature of your business and your business liabilities. We don't want the transfer of liability to go in one direction or another. So by structuring your entity in a proper business, you are already ahead of the game. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is very similar to what I just spoke about, trying to separate the liability and taking a closer look so that your company isn't necessarily owning all the assets that you have. So it just depends. And sometimes if you have a commercial building, for instance, you may not want to own that under the same company. You can have your company own your business, maybe your operating business. And then if it's housed in an office inside a commercial building, another company can own that. And then you can have rental income going from one company to the other. And what you've done here is, if you maximized the potential negotiating against a creditor who, if they go after a company, you say, well, I don't own the building, which might cost 500K or $1 million or whatever the case may be. And so now we've removed a little bit of the risk, because we've taken some of the assets and put them under a different business structure. So long as we maintain the integrity of the fact that they're two separate business structures, and we follow all the right laws and regulations about maintaining them as separate, we can get the benefit of two business structures rather than one. So we split up the eggs into multiple baskets is the idea here. Again, there's no one size fits all. It really depends. And in some cases, you definitely do not want to strip all the assets out of a business, because then you're not operating properly. You have to have what you need to do your business. So if you're a restaurant, you can't put the restaurant in some separate entity and say, gotcha, you can't sue me, right? But there are some cases where you can definitely separate a lot of the assets out. All right, let's move on to the next and last piece of the asset protection, which I think goes missed sometimes. People forget that they can do this, or that they have the advantage to do this. So intellectual property, probably think of what's that? That's your branding, your ideas, your slogans, your jingles, your logo. If not copyrighted or registered, or it also includes patents if you're doing patents. If you don't actually register something, you don't have the right to enforce your rights against somebody who misuses it. Simply stated, if someone takes your logo and they start their own company, and now they're trying to be you, but they don't do a really good job at that. And in fact, now they're starting to confuse people, because someone searches you online, and instead of finding you, they find the other person, and then they get confused, and that's causing less revenue to your business. And also, maybe they do a really horrible job and they get sued for being having ethical issues or some kind of big scandal. And now you are associated with this logo that doesn't represent who you are. So now it's costing you some goodwill as well. The way to overcome this is, if you have a logo, a slogan, or something that's so integral to your business that if you take it away, it really takes away from what you're trying to accomplish. In other words, it is part and parcel of what you do. People know you that way. They've identified with you that way. It is really important to consider registering these types of marks, whether it's a copyright or a patent or some kind of idea, because you want to be able to affirmatively and defensively use that right. So defensively would be if somebody's using it and you need to go ahead and defend yourself against them. Affirmatively would be, well, let's say you get sued because somebody thinks that you're confusing or diluting what is their alleging to be their rights to use that slogan or logo. And you could say, well, no, of course not. I've already registered it. I have the rights to this. You didn't. And registering something can actually put you in a much better litigating position against a creditor, or in this case, a defendant. It can actually make it so that you could get attorney's fees if you win. And it bolsters, again, your position. So you don't want to lose money in litigation. You don't want to lose sleep over conflict. And you certainly don't want to lose revenue in your business because of a mark or a copyright that's associated with your business. And there are specialized attorneys who help with this, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. I'm in the estate planning arena, so property of all kinds, and it falls under my wheelhouse, but there are specialized IP attorneys who can help you with the specific registrations with the federal government. And once you have that registration, you are armed to move forward. With that said, I hope you have some great takeaways from asset protection. Just remember, risk management is strategic management, and that's what's going to get you the asset protection. There's no one bulletproof way to accomplish it, but one step is better than nothing.
Yeah. Thank you, Noelle. And I want to ask you guys, I see some things popping through, and we'll have time hopefully at the end for questions. But what I want to hear from you is which one of those, when it comes down to those 4 areas, working with partners, business structures, there's a lot of details that go into each one of those. But if you could choose one of the 4, which one kind of hits home for you? Like, am I, leaving things uncovered? Have I really thought this through? Have I worked with somebody on this? Or did I jump in and say, I'm going to get to that later? I know trademarks, things like that. We saw one company, beautiful nonprofit doing great work. Somebody opened a retail company, took the same name. They thought they were registered, and the nonprofit lost their name. They had to rename themselves because they were now infringing on that. So this stuff comes up all the time. So I want to hear from you in the chat. What's touching you? You guys can put in there just so we can see real quick, and then we'll move on to the next one. Which one kind of stands out for you? I saw that Vanya, you said IP, that one came up for you. You were messaging in on it. And Joanne, concerned about the liability. Yeah, with Australia. Yeah, across the international risk. Okay. Yep. Yeah, keep your chat open. I'm asking questions too while Noelle's talking. So let's dive in just for time purposes. Wealth transfer. What do you guys think of? I don't know if you're, can type again, but when you see a home, this picture is with intention, right? Usually when we look at wealth transfer, we're thinking about stability. What if I built? What can I build on? This home represents this for you. But when sometimes we think about wealth transfer, we are only focused on our home. We're only focused on the cars or the things we own. And sometimes our businesses become the back seat of the wealth transfer planning process. So I'm not sure who has a trust here, but I'm super excited about Noelle to talk about the business transfer and how sometimes the trust process could help you, because guess what? You've got a plan. It's either going to be your plan or potentially the government's plan if it goes into probate. So Noelle, take it away.
Thanks, Amanda. The topic closest to my heart, right? This is the best thing to talk about, which is the gift of control and the gift of reducing conflict and the gift of making it easy for your loved ones to step in and handle your affairs if you're not around or if you lose capacity to act. And so you've probably heard about a trust before, maybe you already have one. That's great. This is a refresher. But the biggest takeaway from wealth transfer is it's better for it to go your way than for the court's way or for some attorneys to fight over family dynamics way. And the best way to be in control is to have this trust. It's a document that sets your rule book about how your assets get divided, where they go, who controls them, and how. And it's a way to keep things pretty private, making sure we have the assets going to the right people, reducing that family conflict. Look, there's conflict in every family. Even in the best of families, when a loved one is gone, things change and hurt comes up, and sometimes disagreements, unintended even, can lead to some of bigger wounds. So how do we make it clear who has the rights to what and who has the authority to what? The trust is the way to do that. So that smooth transition of wealth is so critical for the peace of the family. And we haven't even gotten to, all the great benefits of tax reduction potentiality and pre-planning for heirloom assets and all kinds of creative things we could do, special needs trust for folks who need that, and really honoring that family dynamic and being able to facilitate what's going to be the best. And sure, we can't have it all. We can't tell the future, but we can do our best to plan ahead. So planning ahead either for passing away or losing capacity. And this applies to your wealth as well as to your business. So if you're here and you're still with us, that's wonderful. But what if you lose capacity? Who maintains your assets for your own benefit? And that's a big part of estate planning and having the trust. You're actually tagging people to step in and take care of you and even consider the specific needs of your business if that's what needs to be maintained to continue to produce revenue for your family that's dependent on it. And the people that you tag could be different for the business than they are for, let's say, transfer of wealth after your passing. So we can be as creative as we need to be to make sure that all the right players on your team are in the right spots, taking care of your family affairs, and then making sure when the wealth transfer does happen that it's, again, going to the intended parties, avoiding probate. Probate is basically a state court process that exists for when somebody does not have a trust or does not leave specific instructions on how they want their assets to be divided and transferred, and there's nobody to actually transfer them because, let's say, their name is the only one that's on title. So probate is a title transfer process, and we basically ask the judge to transfer title. But I wish it was that simple and I wish it was that clear, but it's not. We have to go through all the hoops of petitioning the judge and appointing the executor and paying a bunch of fees and involving attorneys. I love attorneys, but sometimes they're not the people you want to talk to after you've lost a loved one. So it's just much easier to have everything planned out in advance inside of this trust mechanism. And to keep it simple for today, a trust is a legal document that's an extension of you, and it can hold title to your assets. You still own them, you still manage them, you still benefit from them during your lifetime. So it's a rule book that we use now and later after you're gone. All of the rules related to the transfer of wealth then start coming into play. So if you don't have a succession plan or a transfer plan, you're leaving it up to the dynamics of what will happen in the future. And that's a pitfall that we can definitely avoid because we can make the best kind of GPS instructions, make sure that car doesn't go in the ditch and we actually have a way out, or at least if there is a disagreement, we have the trust to resolve those disagreements, and things can be much easily settled when we have a document that actually says your intentions and some people who are lined up that you trust to take control and manage your affairs. So let's say now we have a trust. What do we do with it? On to the next slide where we talk about what's called funding your trust. In other words, if I have this document and it says, my trust owns all my stuff. Let's say the document, by way of analogy, is a delivery truck. And we tell that delivery truck, I want all my stuff to go to my spouse, my loved ones, my kids, whatever the case may be, my parents who I love, whatever the case may be. How do we actually get that delivery truck to deliver all your stuff? We have to legally put the assets inside of the truck. And the way to do that is to transfer title, change ownership of all your assets into the name of your newly created trust. That's called funding the trust. So by way of example, you have a property, maybe your primary residence, we change the deed from you to you as trustee of your trust. And now your house is on that delivery truck. Perfect. And we don't want to miss that because that's usually the biggest asset. But what about our businesses? A lot of people go and they create an estate plan. Sometimes they don't even put their house in their trust because they missed that, or they got some kind of template document, wasn't working with an attorney. That's okay. We all do that. That's never too late to fix it until it is too late. So the takeaway is, for your business, you don't want your stock or your LLC membership or the managerial authority over your business to just be left in your name, because the business entity will now be stuck and subject to probate if nobody else can actually transfer the ownership. So it really depends on if you're working with multiple partners, if you have operating agreements or not, that say, well, what happens if there is a trigger event like death of an owner, death of a stockholder, death of a membership, a limited liability company member? What do we do in that instance? Usually the documents say it's going to go back to that owner's estate. Well, that owner's estate usually has a will that says what they want. And then we can try and go through the process of going through probate to prove who's in charge to make the decision. Now, if you have a trust, we can try and prove that the trust is the owner or the beneficial owner of the asset. But a lot of times we get into a lot of hurdles in doing this, and the Secretary of State might not accept the certain documents submitted to them. We can't prove ownership. And now we have to go to court to try and unwind all of it. The easiest way is, of course, your managers can stay you, the board of directors can stay you and others involved. It's the ownership that gets transferred into the trust. So by way of analogy, think of a Russian doll scenario where you own your company or your entity, and then underneath that, you manage it. Perfect. Now you take the next layer, which is you as the owner transfer your interests up into your trust. And now your trust owns your entity, which you also then control. So if you think of it that way, it'll be much easier as you move forward to think about, well, I think my stock certificates are in my name, or, I think the operating agreement for my LLC still says me or my spouse. Those are definitely things to look at. We don't want to miss that small administrative hurdle, just to make things, again, smoother, cleaner, and easier for our loved ones.
So, what do you guys think so far? Whose plan is your plan? I mean, wow. I don't know how many of you guys have heard about putting your business in the trust. Can you please in the chat let me know, have you heard about this? Have you done it? Have you thought about this before? Just so we can get a gauge on what you guys are taking away from this section or anything else. Yeah, Joanne, yes, definitely done it, and we'll do it again. Awesome. Awesome. Is this valuable for you? I mean, these are the little nuggets that sometimes we are not talking about. We talk about them in general things, but to be able to have these tools and to think about it, make sure, Eddie, thank you for sharing. She's done it. Awesome. Sometimes we hear and work with individuals and businesses, and a lot of things are built, structures are built, but things are not put into the structures, not put into the trust, not put into the buy-sell agreement. They make the agreement but never fund it. And this is where some of those little pitfalls come, and that I wish I would have starts to be shared, because you take it to a certain point and then the process stops. So just make sure that whatever you're starting and doing, make sure to go all the way through. And if you need help with that on the legal side, you've got Noelle, you've got a whole bunch of people on different aspects, but love this question, right? Think about this. Whose plan is your plan, or whose plan is my plan? So you guys can keep that in mind. All right, the last section we're going to walk through today is all about housekeeping. I don't know how many of you like to clean. I actually like to clean. It's kind of fun for me. It's like my decompression time. But sometimes we don't think about the cleaning of our legal world, like what we have, and is it up to date? Is it tidy? Did we go through our documents this last year? A lot of us, I don't know how many of you do marketing plans every year. business plans every year. I always give the analogy, yeah, I do the business plan, and if it gets put away into your folder and collect software dust for the year, and we pull it out the next year, how good is that plan for us, right? So we want to make sure that not only are you looking at those documents for your business, but how could we potentially be tidying up for our legal side of our business? And what does that look like? What does it look like from an operational document standpoint? What has changed? Things changed, right? Over the year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. There was a, if you did your business valuation 10 years ago and your company was worth 500,000 and now it's worth 10 million, wouldn't it have been good to redo the documents and make sure all the stuff was put in place now that you have grown so much? But if not, that would be worth what you guys put into the documents back then. That's a little scary. So I'm excited for Noelle to walk through this agreements, contracts, and even compliance, things that you guys maybe have heard about, know you should be doing, or what could you be doing. So here we go. Noelle, take it away.
Thanks, Amanda. I absolutely love this home analogy. And when I was preparing, I was thinking of all these great, fairly laughable touch points with cleaning your house and remodeling. And if you miss a one room in the house and never clean it, right, that's going to cause a lot of problems, especially later down the road. And so you can think of how this really applies. But one big takeaway is you own your home, but your home is also separate from you. Right. So that distinction is really important. So much like your business entity, you own your business entity, you operate your business entity, but it is separate from you. It is not you. And so long as we can maintain that separateness and maintain the integrity of that separateness, the more protected you will be. And the list can go on, just like your house maintenance list. You've got your quarterly, you've got your annual, your biannual, your inspections. Same thing with your business. There are just some things you have to do on an operational level. There are things you must do and should do on a maintenance level, and we'll go through all of those in a little bit here with some of these operating documents and such. And then there are just things like, let's say, natural disaster or kind of other attack type events that could happen that would cause you to act. So that could be a liability to your business or some kind of change in the law. Okay, now we got to really restructure things, stay up to date. So again, we're strategically planning, we're making sure we're ahead of the game. So love the home analogy. And I think what I want you to focus on and remember is it is separate from you. And so how do we maintain that separateness and that integrity of that separateness? Because if we can't, through litigation, prove to the creditor or prove to wherever the liability is coming from, my business is separate. I have kept it separate. It has its authentic and personal separateness from me. Then the law will protect you because you've created this business structure that gives you some type of limited liability versus just doing a handshake and having a contract with someone. So the lack of maintaining your entity and the lack of keeping it separate will start blurring the lines between what is you and what is your business. And the more we blur, the less we can prove that you actually have an authentic, separate business entity with all the protections that could be provided to you. So more on this if you're interested. There's a lot of really granular legal stuff that goes into proving alter ego theory and whether your business is really separate or not. What attorneys get paid a lot to argue on your behalf, but we don't want them to have to do that. We want you to be confident in your own ability to do that. So one of the biggest things is your operating documents. That's like your business entity telling us about itself, because again, it's separate. It's not you. So we need to find out, what is your business entity all about? Why are you in business? How do you operate your business? What do you do? What are your rules? What are your expectations? And there's a bunch of templates out there depending on your kind of business, the law of the state you're under, how many partners you're going to have, what kind of voting rights they have, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. Sure, we can have an operating agreement that's a page long. Is it an operating agreement? Yes. maybe sign it. That would be a first start. I've seen a lot of them that are not even signed. The other is, does it say everything it needs to say? And if it leads to some ambiguity or some place of contention or argument, that's when it becomes a stumbling block for your successors or a potential gap for a creditor to poke a hole through. Because then we need to pay attorneys or try and argue about what it really meant for that. Especially if, let's say, your operating agreement is a template agreement and it says that you're taxing your entity a certain way, but you're actually taxing it a different way, that could cause some problems too. And sure, we can go back and try and fix it, but ideally we shouldn't have to. So think about things that will change over the course of how you do business. Maybe you're adding partners, maybe capital contributions changing, your business structure or business purpose is changing. Your operating agreements need to be maintained to match what you're trying to accomplish, and watch out for changes in the law that might require some things in your operating agreements to be included. Let's look at the next reason. The next slide, please. Oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. So little to no maintenance or forgetting to memorialize significant financial decisions on behalf of your entity. So this is maintaining your entity and maintaining its separateness by actually doing things like minutes, making sure everything is big decisions, like you took out a loan with the government, or you hired a few employees, or you're starting to change your structure of how you do things. And it's important to actually go through the process and say, okay, board of directors has to meet and vote on this. And now we're going to pass this resolution to make this action on behalf of the entity. Now, it might kind of sound weird because you may be the only owner and the manager and the board or president, and you might feel funny to actually memorialize this in writing, but it's important that you do, because that adds more weight and more facts to the fact that this is now a separate business and is operating as a separate business. And even though you are playing all these different legal roles, you are doing them under the authority you have that the business gives you, and not under your own personal authority. And so you may have to sign something specifically, making sure you're doing it under that specific role. And of course, updating and keeping up with the Secretary of State registrations. Legal maintenance like this has to be respected, because let's say your Secretary of State registration goes into a bad status or out of status because you didn't pay the fee, or you didn't submit the report or the statement of information, etc. Now you've opened yourself up to risk and liability, because if a litigation happens during that time, they can prove that you were out of status. And that's horrible. So something as simple as keeping your entity on time, maintained, and submitting all the reports, so you have the protection from the government that you are an operating entity in good status during the time of the litigation. Let's look at the next way we can keep some of the legal housekeeping for your businesses to maintain that integrity. Any agreements and contracts you have that the entity is engaging in business with some other entity or some other person, making sure that the right person is signing. Again, even though it kind of seems silly because you're the one maybe signing on behalf of everything, it's important to do that, because you're maintaining, again, the integrity and separateness of the entity, as well as if there is some kind of contractual dispute between you and somebody else, you can say, well, my entity is the one that hired you. And so now, again, we get the protection of the entity versus, well, you hired me and you gave me the invoice from your personal email, and they start trying to use that against you as ammo. And we want to avoid things like this, especially with banking. It could be very tempting to just write a personal check or use a credit card that's unassociated with the business. We want to limit that as much as possible. I'm sure you know this, but just driving the point home, banking absolutely needs to be separate for the protection of those transactions, especially business transactions. Invoices should have your letterhead on them and everything like that to, again, maintain that separateness, maintain that integrity of your business. I've gone so much as to say office space should be separate, even if you're working from home. I know it's kind of a harder argument. It's like, I work from home. How is it a separate business? Try and do as much as you can to make it separate. And if you are renting office space, let's say from a building you own, try and do some kind of rental agreement between your building and your business. Again, maintaining that separateness, leveraging both entities if possible. Let's look at, I believe, the last piece here, keeping up with new laws. I don't have all the time in the world to tell you about all the laws. It really depends on what your business does. If you're operating business with selling goods or not, the state laws you're in, the federal laws that apply to you, depending on what you're dealing with, professional laws, regulatory laws specific to what you do, compliance, etc. But one thing that actually governs all of us is, or all entities, is most entities, is Corporate Transparency Act. And I'll leave you with this, and we can open it up for questions. It is a federal law that requires reporting beneficial ownership information to the federal government, meaning who owns your entity. And it's as simple as going online and reporting to the federal government with FinCEN. The second you do that, you're good. You don't need to do it every year, but if there's a change, you do need to go and amend your reporting. And the point of the law was to deter terrorism and money laundering, and they've essentially put the burden on business owners, law-abiding citizens to do this reporting. But hopefully with the information they have, they'll be able to fight terrorism and money laundering and other fraudulent activities. So they want to know who the owner is. They also want to know who the financial control person is. And so if you think about this in relation to, let's say, your trust, if you actually took your membership or your stock and you transferred it to your trust, now we have multiple layers of reporting because the entity itself needs to report who the managers are, but then the owners are also related to this other entity, which is your trust. And so trusts don't have to report, but trusts that are owners of businesses now have to report information about who is in control of the trust and who owns the trust and manages the trust. So it can be a little bit complicated. It doesn't have to be. You can definitely do it yourself, but this is one of the things that just wasn't enacted and now we have to follow it. And the biggest takeaway here, and I'll just leave you with this because we're about up with time, is the liabilities related to the entity. So if you're doing partners with, if you're in business with multiple people, your entity is the one that has to pay a fine if the reporting isn't done. And so if you have an unwilling partner that doesn't want to do the reporting or doesn't want to give you their information, now you have to consider, well, what does my operating agreement have to say about this? Do we have the right mechanisms to actually enforce what are we going to do if we have, let's say, a partnership of many families, many of them have trusts. That's a big task to do this reporting. So how do we overcome these hurdles? We work together, we make a plan, but definitely want to be appraised of these new changes in the law that might actually trigger some other changes and some dusting of your house and some more maintenance that requires your attention.
Ooh, some good pointers, Noelle. I hope you guys are taking away some very valuable points. If it be a reminder, great. If it be new, awesome. Maybe you can sit down with Noelle. I'm going to share a link with her, but where do you need a little legaling tidy up? I want to kind of have you think about that. Think about your situation. Obviously, these sessions are about you taking action on your business to help you and your business take it to the next level. So if you do need a little legal tidying up, what can you do on yourself? And what can you do with a professional? And then I just want to do a couple quick reminders. So we talked about a few things, but I want to know from you, what stuck out? What do you guys remember? What's a legal pitfall that comes to mind before I show you what we talked about? Because we went through quite a few things, but what comes up to mind? And then I'm gonna open up to questions and share how you can book a time. Noelle has been generous to offer a 30-minute consultation, anybody on this call. And then obviously if she could help you out, take it from there. But that's a big value. You're not going to get that from an attorney. It's very tough to find that. So it's just a big give. So what comes up from what we talked about today? What kind of pitfall? Yeah, new compliance. Yes, it's a big challenge, especially with many partners. Risk with partners in the US. Yes, Joanne. What else is coming up? What do you guys remember? I'm putting you guys to the test. Anything else? Anything else? And I'll start letting them go. Okay. We talked about asset protection, wealth transfer, operating documents, contracts, compliance, agreements, a whole bunch of things. And I want to leave the door open for Noelle to answer some questions. I'm going to take us back to the beach and say, what treasures did you uncover today? What do you find valuable? What was so valuable that you're like, I'm so glad today was worth my time because of this. This was the one nugget. I'm going to walk away and be able to do something.
And Amanda, we do have a couple questions. Banya said
Okay.
she had a few questions on IP, intellectual property of concepts. Joanne said, I'm curious about the liability for US company to partner with an Australian company and vice versa. Lynn Wong said, investing in protecting IP is resonating with me the most and really understanding that a little bit more. So wanted to make sure that we gave Banya and Joanne and Lynn time to, receive some sort of response in the last few minutes we have.
Okay. Noelle, I'm going to let you do that.
Absolutely. Thanks. Just to follow up on what Amanda was having you think about as well, just an encouraging nugget from me is start somewhere. This is not to overwhelm you. We're not here to make things difficult. We're here to encourage you. So even if you just need to take one step today, that's awesome. To answer some of the questions, I think a lot of it in relation to international business transactions will come back to the contract between those two businesses, because the contract will usually say what law they've chosen to follow, or in the event of some kind of breach of agreement, what do we do to arbitrate that or mediate that? And so I would point to first the contract that both of the businesses have agreed to, or if it's smaller scope than that, like a sale of a good or an item, it just really depends on where is the liability. And in terms of where to litigate the issue, it usually would say in the contract where. Otherwise, the two parties would try and hail each other to court in either country, and then depending on what laws apply, they would have to include or try to include the laws of both countries, I would imagine. But since I don't litigate in this area, it's hard to say exactly what would happen. It takes a specific like fact pattern to understand exactly what the question is that we have to address. So if you're doing business with another company that's abroad, or you're an abroad business doing company in the US, definitely need to work with a business attorney who understands the ramifications of that. The other question related to IP of concepts, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. And that's okay, because I'm not an IP attorney. I would be happy to connect you with one, or at least talk to you about your situation, making sure we understand what exactly is the fear or the goal or the project and the vision that you have. And that way we can identify some legal bolstering of your position. But I'm pretty sure it has to be expressed, just from what I remember. So if it's an idea in your head, nobody's going to know that. But if you're able to express it, put it in writing or in some kind of format, ideas in that way are able to be registered. I think they have to be distinct from other ideas, and the likelihood is that the idea has already been registered maybe in a different industry, so that the degree to which you can argue yours is distinct, I don't know. So an IP attorney can help with that, but it's definitely something to continue to look into. You can absolutely talk about it offline and connect you to the right people.